The first time I saw a member of the Anura tribe was on the banks of the Iroquois River. The guide had stopped the boat so I could use the bushes, and while I was doing that, a face painted in bright red stared at me from the trees. It almost knocked me off my feet. The figure soon came closer and I saw it was an indigenous man. He wore a necklace made of seeds, his body covered in Urucum patterns, a bow and arrows in one arm, and the day's catch in the other. The guide walked toward him with his arms open to show he carried no threat. He spoke in one of the local languages and the man relaxed. "He is Anura," the guide turned to tell me with a grin. "The ones you came here to meet." They exchanged a few more words and then the guide motioned for me to follow. I obeyed, carried away by the adrenaline of meeting in person what I had only read about in an obscure article published a year earlier. The Anura, the healthiest people in the world. As an anthropology researcher, the information about Anura's health and lifestyle was fascinating. And as an adventurer, traveling to the Amazon to meet its native peoples had always been on my bucket list. I emailed the author of that article, the same guide leading me now, and we arranged the trip. It was a long journey from Berkeley to Manaus, and from there to the closest town near the Javari Valley. The guide had warned me that very few people ever had the courage to come this far. But it was definitely worth it. This could mean a book contract, a class to teach at the university, and a complete change in my life, and in fact my life did change, but not in the way I imagined. We followed the man for half an hour through the dense forest, surrounded by a swarm of mosquitoes. I used the time to go over best practices with the guide, who was also an academic. He studied isolated tribes in the Javari Valley for 2 decades, and recently had met the Anura. They lived mainly on fish and cassava flour but had the most impressive longevity he had ever seen. The tribe had a little over 40 members, including 5 who were believed to be in their 90s, something almost unheard of among indigenous communities. The younger members were tall, lean, and strong, with teeth white as clouds. There had never been a recorded infant or childbirth death, and the last illness in the community had occurred more than a year ago. For personal reasons, the guide decided to spend a few months among them to investigate the source of their unusual health. That's when he wrote the article. He told me all this between his coughing fits that had been getting worse since we left Manaus. I figured he was searching for health himself, though from the sound of that cough, it seemed hopeless. "And you? Any problems?" he asked with a joking tone. "Maybe it's time to get healthy." I laughed, pointed at my thick glasses, and said my eyes could be better. Soon we arrived at an open field of packed earth where the village stood. Some people were gathered there. The men watched us in silence, bows in hand, while the women held children painted with dark markings. The man who had led us made a sign for us to stay put and walked over to the group, exchanging a few quick words. Soon after, an older man approached, wearing a large headdress of red and black feathers. I figured he was the chief. He spoke with the guide, who gave him a backpack filled with items bought in the city. The chief seemed slightly annoyed and looked me up and down, just as I looked at him. Judging by his hair, he had to be over 50, yet his lean, muscular body seemed like it was taken out of a bodybuilding competition. After the exchange, the chief seemed to accept me, and we were led into the village. It was small, made up of 5 thatched houses with hammocks hanging inside. In the center there was a fire, and next to it stood a large object I could not identify. The chief brought us closer, and I saw it was a dark wooden structure, rectangular, about 8 feet tall and 3 wide. Carved into it were strange symbols, with drawings of teeth running along all its edges. The structure was fixed into the ground like a tree, and at its base lay fruits, roots, manioc, fish, and even a live deer tied by a vine. Everything was marked with something that looked like black ink, and I noticed the fish carried earlier by the man were there too. I asked the guide what it meant, and he explained that the Anura worshipped a forest spirit that appeared in the form of a jaguar, and they made offerings to it. Tonight is the full moon, and they'll have a ritual for this deity, he said, caught in another fit of coughing. Wait until then and you'll get it. During the rest of the day I watched the men of the tribe hunting peccary, weaving hammocks and baskets, while the women prepared fish and made the ornaments for the rituals later that night. I couldn't understand why, but the tribe treated us with indifference and even unease, especially the guide. He clearly hadn't made many friends during his last visit. I wrote everything down in my notebook in a kind of ecstasy, and kept asking the guide about his theory for the health of these people. It had to be genetic, I concluded, returning to the argument he had made in his article. But he shook his head and said no, he no longer believed that. Now he was convinced the secret lay in their diet, and above all in a herb that only grew in that region, called bead dabo, widely used by the Anyura in their rituals as a drink. I drank it once, he told me. And I believe it's the reason I'm still alive. Lung cancer has tried to take me a few times. So they'll offer us some tonight? I asked, curious, and still processing the fact that I now knew what he had. He answered yes, though with a sad expression, and took me to the houses where 2 hammocks had been set aside for us. Exhausted, we dozed until sunset, when the ritual began. As night fell, the fire now burned wide and fierce, and the men made a ritual dance that lasted about 30 minutes, alternating with the women. They appeared wearing necklaces of teeth and feathers, their bodies painted with colors I had never seen before. The entire spectacle was overwhelming, beautiful. When it ended, the guide motioned for us to sit in a circle, facing the wooden structure I had seen earlier. Its base was now piled with even more offerings, each marked with the same black dot. There the chief had already been sitting for some time, pounding rhythmically on a large gourd bowl filled with some kind of liquid. It's the bead dabo, the guide whispered. I could see him trembling, as if anxious or afraid. The chief finished preparing it and gave me a strange look again. At the time I thought it was disdain, but knowing what I know now, I believe it was pity. The bowl was passed from person to person around the circle, each one taking a long drink. When it reached me, the guide leaned in and said I needed to drink plenty for the cure to work. Still hesitant, I took only a short sip and passed it on to him. He didn't drink it. All I know is that the taste was awful, and almost instantly a dizziness set in. With the chanting and the fire it felt as if I were hallucinating. I turned to ask the guide if this was normal, but everything went black. I woke up tied to the wooden structure, a thick vine wrapped around my hands and legs, the same way the deer beside me was bound. My head throbbed and the air smelled of smoke and sweat. The rest of the tribe stood in a circle around us, their bodies swaying slowly. Their eyes seemed vacant, their faces empty, and they chanted the same words over and over, loud and mechanical, as if trapped in a trance. On my forehead I felt something cold and sticky, and soon drops of black ink slid down my face. I strained against the ropes and caught sight of the guide, standing directly in front of me, his hand dipped into a small gourd filled with the same ink. "Take this off," I begged, confused. "I can't," he said. His voice trembled, and then he started to cry. "I'm sorry for doing this. In my situation, simple animals are not enough. The offering must be higher." "What do you mean?" I asked, and he didn't reply. At that exact moment, the fire roared and then went out, as if crushed by a violent wind. Darkness fell over everything, my chest tightened. Then, from the edge of the forest, 2 blue points appeared. At first I thought they were fireflies, but soon they moved closer. I saw a shape, massive and glowing faintly. It looked like a jaguar, but far larger than any jaguar on Earth. Its body was strange, almost translucent, shifting like smoke, yet its growl shook the ground beneath me. Terror flooded my body. "Please," I screamed at the guide. "Let me go. I need to live," he sobbed, repeating. "I need to live." The thing leapt at the totem, and suddenly it was right behind me. Its jaws ripped into the offerings with a frenzy, devouring fruits, fish, roots, tearing them apart with wet crunches. Then it turned to the deer beside me. The sound was unbearable. The animal shrieked once and was silenced by those huge teeth, its blood spraying warm across my face and chest. In the chaos, the vine around me snapped, and I staggered free. I ran into the forest with all the strength I had, my legs barely under me. Behind me, I heard the guide running and screaming. "Come back!" Branches whipped my face as I stumbled forward, blind in the darkness. Then he caught up, slammed into me, clawing at my arms, screaming and crying. We rolled on the ground, biting, scratching, locked together like animals. My glasses shattered and slipped from my face, and through the whole fight I could still hear the footsteps of that thing coming closer, heavy and thunderous. I managed to break free when his coughing fit returned in full force. I stood and left him on the ground, now marked with the same black ink that had been on his hand and on my forehead. For a moment I didn't even realize what I had done. When the creature reached the spot, I was already running again. Behind me came the guide's screams, louder and louder, followed by the tearing sounds of teeth ripping through flesh. His cries were high and terrible, nightmare-like, and I swear I heard him yell, "I need to live one more time," before it stopped. I ran until my lungs burned. Luckily, I remembered fragments of what I had seen earlier that day and finally reached the river. I walked along the bank for nearly an hour until I found the boat. Hands shaking, I started the motor the way I had watched him do it, and it worked. But I must have done something wrong, because I pushed off into the current for nearly 2 hours before the engine suddenly died. I tried again and again to start it, but nothing happened. At last I realized I was too tired to fight anymore. My body collapsed on the wooden boards and I fell into a heavy sleep. It was only the next morning that a merchant boat woke me, shouting in Portuguese. Back in Manaus, I had trouble telling my story to the authorities. That region was restricted, requiring special clearance to enter, which I did not have. And the guide, they told me, had been under investigation by the local police for 6 months. He had once been a respected researcher, but as his cancer worsened he became entangled in land disputes, selling his expertise to illegal loggers and even blackmailing tribes in exchange for access and resources. That's why they didn't love him back there. In the end they let me go, maybe thinking I had already been through enough. And it was only on the flight home, as the plane crossed the endless green and the winding rivers of the Amazon, that I noticed something different. Through the window I could see the details of the trees, the water, and the clouds in the sky. Even without my glasses, my vision was healed in that ritual, and the guide became my offering.